Good morning. The November 10th, 2021 board workshop is now in session. Pam, roll call, please.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Mrs. Campbell? Mrs. Jenkins?
Present.
And Mr. Susan?
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The purpose of this workshop is to discuss the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, or ESSER Fund, under the American Rescue Plan, or ARP Act. Dr. Stephanie Soliven, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Leading and Learning, will be providing us with information before we move into the special meeting at 10 a.m. Dr. Soliven, first, thank you. I know this has been quite the task with a very short time frame, so we appreciate all that you've done.
Well, thank you, Ms. Belford, Dr. Mullins, and board members. I'm excited to be here today. I'm really proud of our district. I think good work has been done to really understand the needs of our community, honor the feedback of our community, bring that together with our collective expertise to do some really good work with the American Rescue Plan funds. And so today I'm going to talk through each of the major buckets with you. Right now, this is a very draft application, and so I just want to emphasize that. As you all know, we began the process for the ARP funds back in really August and September. And we were quite surprised 2 weeks ago today when the first we heard about it was the application with a deadline of Friday. The good news is we had already done so much work. We read the federal regs and we were really ready to move forward. Lo and behold, yesterday, the days are blurring. The Department of Ed sent out a message extending the deadline into December because districts had to do community feedback. And so we were once again sort of ahead of the curve, in good shape, but I certainly appreciate a little extra time when working with a grant of this scale. I'm gonna have to put it away for a day after today and get some fresh eyes on it. So today I'm going to be sharing with our draft application, which is about 4 million over right now. I do think pulling some hard costs, I can get us there rather painlessly, but it was quite painful when our cabinet came together, carefully reviewed all the community feedback. In fact, the week before I talked to cabinet about really staying keyed into that spreadsheet that Ms. Reinhardt kept online and really began writing towards that. So we were originally 160 million over budget. So in the last week, we had to make some hard choices and relook at, of course, the community data, relook at our student achievement outcomes and the intent of the grant. And so over the last few days, we've gotten closer and closer and closer. And like I said, I'm close to where some tweaking, I think I can get us there. It's amazing because it's such a substantial amount of money, but in an organization of this size, things go to scale really quickly and costs escalate pretty fast. You know, there's different philosophies in a grant application like this. Some districts put a lot in just a few buckets to just protect kind of the district financial. We haven't done that since ESSER 1. Since ESSER 1, we have had really comprehensive approach to all the different ways that ESSER funds can support our students. Did you do the dance though? That's the question. So we've always made our plans super comprehensive to impact as many aspects of our organization as possible, with two overarching things in mind. One, student outcomes. And student outcomes not only is measured by traditional academic measures, but engagement, attendance, behaviors, participation in things, all the things that we equate to a really positive school environment. And then, of course, the financial stability of the district. Those are some things that we've kept in mind. Something that we're able to do with ARP ESSER, and we hope to amend ESSER 2 with, is more for our workforce. There was much more flexibility in ARP than in the previous grants because that ties so directly into my first comment on student outcomes, right? So student outcomes and employee well-being, staff motivation are just intertwined. I mean, we certainly all know that. So you'll see a lot of that as well in the plan. So over the course of the past few months, our team, our communication team run by, well, team Lori Reinhardt. We're going to call her a team. Frank helps though. She has held 31 different meetings, including our bargaining groups, public comments, student feedback, priority schools, some of the different groups within our community, different minority groups, faith-based groups, business leaders, community leaders and district leadership and staff. As you know, we also had 4 formal community meetings on top of all the requested ones. Hosted 2 different online feedback surveys, one that was kind of a choose your priority and a second one where you could actually fill in your response. When we cataloged all those open responses, about 630 different data points. And our spreadsheet, when I checked it yesterday, again, another view, we're at about 600 different ideas, and there was some clear leaders, some clear things that whether it was our business community, our faith-based group, or our teachers that were a priority. Compensation, no question, was number one. Not only our actual employees, but all of the community groups that we spoke with wanted to see our employees receive additional compensation. In fact, even the student group that we spoke with, that was the one subject that they unanimously agreed on. And they felt really strongly that any compensation should include all employee groups. And so that's something that you will see evident in the plan. Again, is the most common response. Transportation came up a bit, quite a bit, in terms of eliminating barriers. One of the things that we tasked each of our groups to consider is what are the barriers to student success and how we could tackle the barrier so that more students can be positively engaged with activities and programs in schools that we know are great. So you'll see some funds towards that. Activities in general, lots of discussion around activities. And when I say activities, I mean co-curricular and extracurricular, including athletics and clubs and all of those things that make school, helps school meet the needs of all types of children. And so you'll see some work around there and trying to continue to incentivize our employees. I wouldn't say incentivize, because the teachers and staff members that sponsor all these programs, they do it because they love it, but more recognize, I guess, to say, and give them some compensation in that. Equalizing access, again, came up a lot. Mental health and behavior issues. I would say that was the #1 concern brought up by our students. And it was a really powerful night when we met with our student leaders. Definitely lots of concern about mental health, social emotional learning, and students being able to have sort of unfettered access to resources. Academic support, as you can imagine, lots of requests for all kinds of additional resources, tutoring, and similar opportunities. And then some facility and health initiatives. Those were the big buckets that if you look at the spreadsheet, you'll see lots of yellow across that our community stated over and over again. So it's just kind of a preface to our discussion today. First, I want to orient you to the 2 different handouts that are in front of you. And these are the 2 components of our application for the grant. And again, these are super drafty, so please bear that in mind. The first one, the one with the cover, is where we describe each activity that we are requesting to be funded. And on the second one, you'll see a rather comprehensive budget sheet because we have to, with specificity, right down to function and object, identify the costs associated with each item. You'll see some items highlighted. That's just my reference point that I need to go back and put some more information. It's not over or undervaluing anything. It just means I have work to do. And like I said, I still need to pare about $4 million off the budget before we submit it. So if you open up, we're going to start with this narrative process, and I'm going to show you how to make these two marry with each other. Hopefully there's not too many mistakes. If you turn to the third page of the narrative handout, you'll see the beginning of the grant application. This grant is divided into two chunks. First is activity 1, and that's literally the activity 1, and that's addressing learning loss. We're required to spend 20% of our allocation in that bucket. We've exceeded that 20% in addressing learning loss, but just wanted to make you aware that that is a required set aside. The second activity, activity 2, has multiple letter subsets. So you'll see activity 2A, activity 2B, activity 2C. All those, all the way through S, are the different categories within activity 2. And so if you look at the budget sheet and you look at this first page side by side, you'll see addressing learning loss, you'll see school year academic support, and you'll see that's number 1. So when you look over at the budget sheet, if you look at the fourth column, you'll see that's activity 1, item 1. So those are all the costs associated with activity 1, item 1. I'll give you guys a second to take a look at it because it'll be important as we move forward. And as you can see, we have to separate it out by employee type, by all the fringes. And so then as an example, activity 1, 2 is then you'll see the summer school programming for elementary. So that's how this narrative matches this budget. I thought you might find a little moment of that helpful. So on that note, I'm just going to briefly go over each of the items, and your eyes can kind of go to the budget that we have proportioned for that item to get to the budget. So school year academic support, that continues what we've done last year and this year, and providing dollars to schools to hire teachers for before, during, and after school academic support, one-on-one tutoring, small group tutoring, Zoom tutoring at night, all of that extra help through the staff on campus. We've written it in for guidance counselors as well, so guidance counselors could host evening hours, social workers, and instructional assistants. That was kind of a lesson learned after first go round. We missed the instructional assistants and them being able to work as well. So all 4 of those employee groups will be able to, at their hourly pay, provide additional academic services for kids in all elementary, middle schools, and high schools. I'm really excited that we were able to continue that. Item 2, elementary summer recovery program, kind of speaks for itself. Ms. Klein has put together a pretty aggressive plan to include more students in elementary summer school to get that extra support, particularly in the primary years. She's really focusing on strengthening their literacy skills. I should note that when you look at the budget, most of the items in the budget represent school year 23 and school year 24, and some also include school year 22. You'll typically see that notation in the first item attached to the activity because some of the things we didn't fund for this year yet, and we want to add funding to it. So a lot of these, nearly everything in the plan represents 2 years. Some of them include this year as well. Secondary summer program, really excited to not only continue credit retrieval, we've added some additional units for performing arts programs and camps and additional enrichment programs for schools to make determination. So we want secondary summer school to be beyond credit retrieval and beyond sort of that old perspective that you've done something wrong to be in summer school. We want to make it a positive connection, so you'll see some of the notes attached to item 3. Item 4 and 5 continue the security specialists and transportation for summer school. This past year was a great success. Our transportation did an amazing job. Each of our sites identified bus stops for their students. So the student didn't have to be 2 miles away because we're paying for it. And so schools could look at their community and their neighborhoods and identify spots, and those became their bus stops to school, and it worked great. We had no problems at all. Food services isn't on there because it's not required for us to fund. Kevin Thornton, as always, will make sure all of our sites have both lunch and breakfast again. It just didn't need a budget item. Item number 6. So again, if you're checking the budget, it's 1.6. That's our extended school day for our 5 most fragile schools. And that represents the cost of continuing that for school year 23 and 24. About $2.1 million a year to cover the cost of the employees for that 9th hour. We wrote it with a lack of specificity because obviously Ms. Klein wants to evaluate data at the end of the year, evaluate the schools, evaluate that it's working, and so maintain some flexibility in that language as we move forward. Contracted services for supplemental tutoring. One thing that became immediately evident is we didn't have the capacity in our employees to manage all tutoring. Ms. Klein already does a significant amount of this with Title I, and so this has set aside some funds for us to look at some contracted services for tutoring when our programs aren't meeting the needs of the families. Raise, you heard a lot about raise at our data meeting, and you'll see those items to target the priority efforts to improve those elementary schools on the raise list, including a coordinator to be singularly focused on the school improvement work at her raise schools. Item 9, primary instructional assistants. I'm going to give Ms. Klein a lot of credit. She dreamed big. She originally asked for 200 so that every kindergarten and first grade class had an instructional assistant, which is, of course, an incredible idea, but not in the budget, but more importantly, the human capacity isn't there. And so we've added some assistance for her to be able to work with principals and her staff to prioritize that, particularly in the early reading classrooms. Academic online subscriptions, we had a pretty big range of requests, and so we left kind of a placeholder with a nominal budget to be able to meet the teachers' needs. Vocabulary, flocabulary were mentioned quite a bit. I think Nearpod has kind of merged with them, and we'll go through, of course, the traditional procurement process, so we didn't want to name a specific one, but some dollars there. Penda Science instructional materials. Really excited for our elementary folks on this one. Ms. Klein did a pilot the first last year, and the schools had exceptional increases in their science data on FSA. This current year, through ESSER 2, it is in every one of our elementary schools, and this will continue the use of Penda Science through school year 23 and school year 24 for every single elementary school. iReady, you guys know iReady, so I'm not going to spend too much time on iReady, but what is important to note, this continues the full instructional toolkit for every one of our schools in both reading and math. Most of you remember the hard decisions we've had to make in who gets it and who doesn't get it, and this ensures everyone gets it. Item 13 is the continuation of our Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention teachers. Those are in place this year in the elementary priority schools, funded through ESSER 2. This will continue them through school year 24. Primary literacy specialists, again, this is a continuation. These are 2 experts that work in our highest need schools to provide some direct instruction in primary literacy. Home base, you may or may not have heard of home base yet, but our student services team piloted with 6 schools this year a home base program, particularly with students with social communication disorders, and it establishes literally a home base, a safe space for students to receive services. Oftentimes those are our ASD students, but not exclusive to our ASD students. They did extensive training with both the teachers and the instructional assistants and put up a classroom that was sensory sensitive, just making up those words as we speak. This will allow us to continue with those 6 sites for the next 2 years, as well as add 5 additional sites. It's been a real positive impact to the schools. Item 16 is targeting math instructional coaches. As you guys know, we're in a math adoption year and the year that the standards change. And so this is a pretty significant impact next year on our schools and our teachers. Moving to a new curriculum in the middle of a time that's kind of overwhelming and stressful is always difficult. And so these instructional coaches will be able to support teachers in that transition. Item 17 is increasing our number of bilingual instructional assistants. Right now, the criteria is fairly high in order to get that bilingual assistant. This allows more schools to receive a bilingual assistant that don't necessarily meet the original plan. Just as a reminder, we have to have a maintenance of equity and a maintenance of effort per the federal guidelines. And so these are supplemental to the ones that the schools may not technically earn. School counseling support, that's in place this year. We provided a guidance counselor or GSP to my 8 priority schools for all the reasons that I don't need to explain. But that will continue their employment through school year 24. You'll see professional development for those math standards that we spoke of, and some additional curriculum development for our CTE teachers. We have a lot of target areas in making sure our students in some of our underperforming clusters have greater success with industry certification. As you know, I mean, that's a great opportunity for workforce. So we're going to work with our teachers on scaffolding instruction and, some of the resources, even I think auto mechanic, the books are written at an incredibly high technical level. So really working through some strategies to help all students succeed. So all of those were activity 1. And as you can see, we're going into activity 2, and you'll see again, it's activity 2A, and then 1, 2, and so on, then activity 2B, and 1, 2, and so on. So activity 2A is any activity authorized by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. That's our main funding for what's been reauthorized over the years, from No Child Left Behind to ESSER right now, and that includes Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, all the titles. So if it's allowable in any of those titled programs, it's allowable for ARP. You'll see a significant plan to expand and increase the impact of the conscious discipline program. And you guys are pretty well familiar with that. I have to say, it's one of the few things that we get universal positivity about. Sometimes we don't. But Student Services team has put together an incredibly aggressive plan to continue to try to help teachers manage their classrooms in a way that minimize disruptions. You'll see some work on attendance, parenting classes, and support. Really excited about that as well. Some Saturday and after hours training. This was a request particularly by our human resources team that puts together a lot of the trainings. We have begged to not pull people out during the school day. And so this allows for additional funds to incentivize evening and Saturday workshops. Some professional development for our IAs, that's critically important. One of the initiatives that we're really excited about is some classroom collaboration furniture. Some of our classrooms are not the warmest, most positive learning environment, with some of the furniture from very long time ago. We've had the opportunity through some capital resources to do some model classrooms in this district, and to go in and visit students in some of the collaborative environments. It's pretty awesome. It is a modest budget. It may look like a lot, but a modest when you go down to how many classrooms we have in this school. I tried to get you more money, Dr. Mullins. Classroom and program supplies. I thought it was really important to put some additional money in the hands of the teachers and the schools themselves. And so we've done a per student $10 allocation for every school, for the school community to identify what supplies would help students, whether that's manipulatives or science labs or whatever it is. We really wanted those to be school-based decisions. So each of the schools will receive an allocation and be able to make those instructional decisions. We'll, of course, ask them to work through their school advisory council like we do on all budgeting items. But we thought it was really important to have that as well. As we go on to activity 2B, I do want to mention a lot of, yeah.
Can I interrupt you for one second? I just want to highlight that idea particularly came from our conversation with students, our Student Government Association. And I just got to give credit to them, their insightfulness, their awareness of what their school needs were. They didn't have, exactly how to spend the money. They said, but you know what? There's needs across our school, across different classrooms and that sort of thing. Can we set aside additional allocation that would run through School Advisory Council? And we really appreciated their contribution to that conversation. So
yeah, one of the threads that you'll see throughout the entire plan is minimizing financial expense to students and parents. Not only because it deters engagement maybe in some programs, but it just adds an additional hardship. Honestly, it's an additional hardship on a teacher who has to collect the fees, right? So we try to put things in place that release some of those burdens for students, families, and teachers. You'll also, I do want to note before we go into the IDEA eligible ones, that many of these could be in any of the categories. And so we did the best fit, but obviously a whole lot of them could go elsewhere. I also want to mention that there is an IDEA separate ARP coming. We haven't gotten it yet. And so Chris made some really thoughtful decisions on knowing what could be in that bucket as well. And that will target traditional IDEA funded activities. And we should get it soon, I think. So we'll see.
do we know yet what our allocation might look like for that?
Yeah, well, I know my estimation, which is just by reading the federal paperwork, and I'm a pretty good estimator. I expect about 3.3, 3.5 million, maybe upwards of 4, depending on if the state pulls a set aside. So somewhere in that $3 to $4 million range. Extended school year Saturday school. This is a pretty big initiative where our student services team is looking to structure a comprehensive program that involves additional academic services with 10 district-wide sites, including instructional assistants, materials, and teachers, transportation, and food services. So you'll see if you look at 2B1, a lot of line item costs associated with it to provide students additional services. Looks like I wrote that twice. We'll fix that. PBIS support, some additional materials. Teachers and schools have been asking for that, and I'll clean up that little error that you just saw. Activity 2C, adult education. I just sent Miss Benjamin back to the drawing board to get her down to 200,000. And so she is right in the middle of reworking her budget, primarily opening up access and flexibility with adult education programs, contracting with transportation, and adding some additional community leisure programs. But I sent her back to the drawing board with less money. So we'll get a fine tune on that later. Perkins, as you know, is our main career and technical education federal program, and we are allowed to spend ESSER funds on anything that aligns to it, and you'll see some substantial budget for supplies. One of the things that we want to do is eliminate program fees through school year 24. So currently, we have school adopted state-approved fees for a student taking a career and technical education course that garners a product. And so our hope is to eliminate those fees during this period of time, because that does become a barrier. I've had students withdraw from a class. Of course, we would tell them we would compensate it for them. But again, eliminate another barrier to high-quality programming. instructional materials, equipment. You guys know we've built enough programs together. Equipment for career and technical education programs is extraordinarily expensive, and we want to make sure we have the most relevant equipment and safe equipment. Sometimes the industries transition so fast that the equipment we're training kids on isn't the most relevant equipment. And industry certification costs, covering some of the expense that we incur for students to take industry certifications. We are one of the few districts that we don't gatekeep industry certification. In some districts, you have to reach a certain point or a teacher determines if you should take the industry certification. We don't gatekeep that opportunity for our students who've completed the work. I love this one. I want to thank our student services team for this submission under activity 2E, Find Help Subscription, which I guess was colloquially named Aunt Bertha. And I can't do justice to this service. I'm going to let you guys take a look at that. But I think it's pretty cool. And as you can see, it goes into that community responsiveness category, and it'll be a really valuable resource, I believe, to our families. And if we move on to activity 2F, both 1 and 2 represent some great materials, programs, and opportunities to serve our community that are not English speakers. And if you've been to a meeting at a school with a strong non-English speaking community, you've seen potentially some live interpretation. Did I say translation? Some live translation going on. I've seen it at Endeavor. Pretty cool. So this will allow some language translation transmitters as well as the translation services. Student services rolled that out, but it has previously been at the expense of the schools to utilize the translation services and go into contract on materials. This will allow the schools not have to separately fund it, which we believe will motivate a increased usage of it for teachers or clerical staff or whomever. You'll see SEL Leadership Team Workshop. That's fairly self-explanatory. And as I mentioned, mental health, SEL curriculum and learning were real high priorities of our community. Transportation to vision services, making sure students who require vision have the support they need. We can get a student free glasses and free exam. Getting there has been what's difficult, and that is the simplest no-brainer solution to impact early literacy, is making sure students' vision is tended to. So we're excited about that. You'll see some specifics on foster care students, some special hardware for some of our ESE classrooms that could hopefully prevent some dangerous situations that our students are sometimes placed in. Continuing with the teachers on assignment that are currently in our schools. These aren't new units. These are the continuation of the ones that have been in our schools for a number of years. And they're in targeted specific schools to support the teams there, and that will continue them through school year 24. And physical health, PE health, FF&E and supplies. Boy, if there was ever an area that we know is important to student well-being, and I have to say we've grossly underfunded. I can tell you the K-12 budget for physical education is around $3,000 a year. For K-12, you heard correctly. So this is an opportunity to get some more equipment and supplies to keep those classes relevant and students wanting to participate. Because that physical health we know is really important to students. And then student fees. This is one, as you can guess, that I submitted. Want to be able to pay for those additional testing opportunities, college applications, the different fees that come. We've got a good amount of bubble kids that don't qualify for free and reduced lunch waivers, but it is a really dramatic impact on the family. So we'd like to provide some money for schools to be able to offset the fees and expenses in becoming college and career ready. Shouldn't cost anything to become college and career ready, but it does. And so that will help with that. Double check all of that. That's the next week's job, is cross-checking to make sure they all match. But yes, I did write a budget in there. Right now it's $150,000, which would be $50,000 for this year, next year, and the following year. So I apologize. That'll be one of the little cleanups. Thank you for catching that. Frank, I assume you're tracking what I messed up on. Thank you. Activity 2G. And this is also about response efforts of local education agencies. And you'll see technology for our student services team. You'll see some ESE procedures and professional development, ESE support team training. I don't think any of those will surprise you as critical needs for our district. And then if you move on to page 12, in activity 2I, that's all the stuff, the PPE, hand sanitizer, cleaning products, and related supplies. We've gotten really good at that. We've moved to a system where the warehouse purchases it all, and then it's free to the schools. So that has made it really easy for us to get better pricing instead of each school going out on their own. So they order it from the warehouse, but it's at a no cost from the warehouse. We have, it's a good budget guess because we've done this now for 2 years. And so we know that's a pretty solid budget. Activity 2J, if you guys remember a couple of years ago, we actually cut some technology specialists right before the pandemic. So obviously it wasn't very prescient of us. So this added back, we did it with ESSER 1 and 2, added back the 6 technology specialists, and this continues it funded through ESSER through school year 24. That's when we anticipate might return to Fund 100 after that 4-year period. 2K, as you can imagine, this is a pretty robust section, and this is about educational technology. And you can see some assistive technology there. That's a hard word for me to say for some reason. Really excited about that. Anything that improves the communication within our classes, within teachers, within students, where that is a challenge, I think is pretty exciting. Dr. Mullins walked out on his Modernizing Classrooms, Classroom of the Future. This is to prove that technology and connectivity. I had to cut that budget a lot, so I'm glad he's not here. We're just going to move right past that. We're just going to move right past that. Student laptops and charging stations. I am pleased to say on behalf of Russell Cheatham and his incredible team, this is a substantial expense, but it will complete the one-to-one plan. So obviously we believe that that is really important for our students to be successful. Right now our middle schools are still in various stages of whether they're going home yet or not. But this will complete his multi-year plan, and we anticipate as quickly as we can get the devices, we will be ready to be a full one-to-one district. Student hotspots, pretty self-explanatory. Device asset management system, as you can imagine, lots of tracking needs for those devices. I think everybody would scream if we lost Zoom at this point. I know our IEP meetings have increased with Zoom flexibility, and we've been able to work with parents much more flexibly with Zoom, so we don't want that to ever go away. You'll see some additional software and technological needs there. And then, of course, some summer training for one-on-one. We want to make sure as we roll out the initiatives to different grade levels, we are training those teachers in some best practices on blended learning. Dr. Mullins, you missed your Classroom of the Future one. Activity 2L. You'll see a lot here because, as mentioned, I think all aspects of our community mention this concern, all educators, all parents, all teachers. And you'll see some comprehensive work there, mental health curriculum training. This is an interesting one for me. As you know, we have a mental health required curriculum, but both our students and our staff just feel like they want to know more. Like everybody thinks it's good, which is awesome. They just want to know more. Our teachers want to be better trained, and we want to make sure that we are managing those lessons in a way that are constantly evolving and reflective of the needs of our students. Contracted services, you'll see a couple of different ones there. We contract with a lot of services now. This will be able to increase the opportunity to contract with those vendors and provide more direct services to our students. They push into our schools, work directly with students, families, and schools. Item 4 there is allowing us to continue the community partnership at Endeavor. They've had a budget shortfall as a result of all the things that folks go through. And this has identified a relatively small budget, actually, to be able to maintain the level of service at Endeavor. A CBA lead, and that is a board certified assistant. And I may have messed that up a little bit there. I'll fix that. This is important because to try to onboard more behavior analysts, they need direct supervision. And so we would like to onboard as many behavior specialists as we can. And this person will be able to prioritize being their supervisor in them finishing their things. Did I mess that up, Chris? Excellent, not bad. School psychologist interns. This looks like a big budget, but it's actually super modest. Right now, we don't pay our interns, and we need them desperately. And other districts pay their interns, and so this will allow us to give a very modest compensation to our interns for they're essentially working full time. And we're always in need of psychologists, and we want them to come to Brevard. All right, moving on to activity 2M. This is focusing on kind of all the other stuff is what I'd like to call it. And you'll see middle school intramurals, funding there to make some facility improvements, to pay supplements for coaches. They're looking at soccer and volleyball, and that might change, but 2 formal opportunities for middle school students to engage. Athletics, FF&E, and supplies. You'll see a pretty big number here. I actually gave them more than they asked for because the equipment is important. And my overarching thread, again, is minimizing expense to students and families, minimizing the burden of coaches to fundraise. So this F&E would allow us to buy cheerleading mats for all the cheer programs and all kinds of other equipment for our athletic programs. We would let, obviously, the athletic directors work with their principals and work with Chris's office to maximize the funds, but it's a really good opportunity to make sure we have the safest equipment, and we, again, minimize that fundraising expense on the families. You'll also see supplies there. So there's one funding string for FF&E, which is basically, it's furniture, fixtures, and equipment, so it's the more expensive stuff. And then the supplies, the balls, the things that are consumable. Again, we'd like our families and our coaches not to have to deal with that. Paid internships for our career and technical education students, and expanding the opportunity for us to have more interns over the next few years. Obviously, I think we all believe those career and technical education internships are like the single best experience for developing our job force. Again, just some nominal teacher hours to be able to manage that. There's a lot of legal requirements with interns. Supplemented supplements. So excited about that. I chose those words. So I wanted to be able to increase compensation for our activity sponsors. That would be our coaches, our band directors, our club sponsors, and make it make sense for these couple years. So this would give each coach or activity or club sponsor 25% bonus for each of those years, if that makes sense. So for example, if a supplement was $1,000, they would get an additional $250. If their supplement was $4,000, they would get an additional $1,000. The teachers and staff that are willing to do all these extra activities and all the hours that come with is the lifeline for a lot of kids. They also serve as mentors. They're also, they're just so important. And the fact that so many of our folks have continued to do it in these critical times, we just really think it's an important priority. So this would allow for that level of compensation for school year 22, depending on when we get an approved grant, school year 23 and school year 24. So an additional 25% for each of those 3 years. Music programs, FF&E, know that Katie's excited. Music is another one of those that it creates barriers. So this will buy the tubas and the risers and the amps, and again, hopefully less fundraising for our parents, less financial burden on the teachers. This will be allocated by ratio K-12, and to make sure they have everything they need. Well, they're not going to have everything they want, but they're going to have a lot more of it, a lot more of what they're looking for, because those items are super expensive. Transportation costs, I mentioned that earlier. This isn't going to cover all transportation, but this would offset some of the costs of some of our programs, and we'd have to work out a ratio on that. But just to make sure that a student in a sport can get a bus, right? So right now that's tough, and we can continue to find ways to help support that. Activity 2N is specifically targeting our transportation services, supplemental transportation services for our students in transition, allowing them to get to a doctor's and different services available to them. Our student services team would contract with a vehicle service to provide that unofficial transportation. Obviously, we bus them to school, but that doesn't mean their transportation items are over. School facility repairs, the one biggie thing that our facilities team is honing in on is carpet. Talk about indoor air quality concerns. I know Jane Klein was thinking about her carpets in those primary classrooms that might be icky. And for me, when I think about band classrooms, if you've been a band mom, they drop their spit on the carpet. It's all true, and it's yucky. Hopefully improving indoor quality via carpets. I don't think that's confusing. And then some opportunity to do some outdoor learning environments. Unfortunately, this is scaled back quite a bit than where it started, but still will allow us to build some spaces. I know when Sue's been working with Jane and I, for me, I'm looking at my schools, my presidential schools, where the kids are indoors all day in a really kind of stifling environment, and having some flexibility for teachers to be finding out the outdoor classroom we think would be pretty awesome. And it's probably self-explanatory why we need to continue the custodial strike team. They have really become all duties as assigned, and I know invaluable to her team. 2P1 is selfishly trying to improve the electrical system in our welding program at Astronaut, and taking that opportunity. Deep cleaning HVAC, right? No big surprise that is a big ticket item and an important need to be in the budget. And of course, filters, and being much more aggressive than we had prior to COVID on filter changing, HVAC cleaning, and all those related things. To Q, fortunately or unfortunately, we have spent a lot of money on expenses related to the medical impacts of COVID in regards to our staff. The fortunate part is our provider codes them in a way that we can see the actual hard costs that COVID has impacted our Health Trust Fund, if I'm saying that correctly. And so this will allow us to offset all of the medical costs that have been associated with COVID. We also have a line item for that in ESSER 2 for $4 million, but that wasn't enough about halfway through last year. And so we're probably going to approach, if I could guess, Dr. Thady, 8 million would be a good guess of the hard medical costs associated with COVID. And this will allow us to offset the impact to the Healthcare Trust Fund. Similarly, the differential energy costs, one of the most important strategies is running the air longer, more, and more often. So that comes with quite a cost on our energy bill, but it's something that everybody obviously agrees it's important. So the increased cost to our energy bill, we believe, can be offset by ARP. Activity 2R, this is truly the other category, and definitely hitting the #1 priority of our community. #1 is premium pay. So ARP ESSER explicitly included the ability to do premium pay for employees. And obviously, that was probably the first thing I put into the plan. Dr. Mullins had requested that we carve aside $20 million towards that. So you'll see rows of information based on the employee groups. I'm going to bottom line you and know it's and tell you it's $20 million. This will allow for compensation in school year 23 and in school year 24. Obviously, premium pay would be non-recurring and would be tied into some criteria and the amounts bargained by the bargaining units. But that much has been carved aside for the 2 years to be able to do that. And I think that's the first time that's been public. So there you go. Now, it's written in the plan, and I'm feeling confident about it, but I just want to emphasize we don't have an approved plan yet, but did have the opportunity to verify with the DOE yesterday that they agree that premium pay is appropriate, and it's in the federal regs as well. So I feel rather confident that it will be approved without question. And then you'll see some other strategies related to compensation. And again, compensation is very important. I again want to emphasize bargaining and approved plan and all those things so that I don't get in trouble. But we're earmarking this money towards it. You'll see we're continuing with the onboarding costs of our substitutes. We're looking at additional funds in terms of class coverage when employees have to cover a class. Employee overtime. Interestingly enough, this was a big miss by me in ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. We never built in overtime, and boy, if we use a lot of overtime. So this is allowing to cover that in schools and employees who want to do overtime to do so without feeling like they're breaking the school bank. Bus driver, signing, recruitment, retention type opportunities. Employment specialists. One of the I didn't get it until I saw this request, that the turnover and challenges have sort of doubled the workload of the folks in human resources. So some employment specialists to be able to onboard more quickly and manage the turnover load. Extended day school premium pay, it was requested that we look at that as an opportunity for our teachers who are working in those extended school day environments to receive an additional premium. The continued employment of existing staff, that is, those are positions we've been funding for a couple of years right now that are above and beyond the staffing formula, and you can see who's sitting in those seats right now. And that would continue them through school year 23 and 24. The board and Dr. Mullins will, of course, have to decide in school year 24 if that makes it back into fund balance or not, the fund 100 or not. And instructional reserve units. We did the same this year with ESSER 2. where we paid for all reserve units and additional units given to schools to be able to meet their needs, those 6-day count units. And this will allow us to continue to cover those for the next 2 years, of course, at a dramatic savings to the district. And then the rest on the budget sheet are indirect costs, administrative costs, charter school costs. And as you can see, the bottom line is 148 million. I've got to get us to 144 million. But again, I've got some tweaking to do. I've got some errors to kind of clean up and make another pass through it slowly. As you can imagine, I've typed a lot of numbers. So going to double check and cross check that. And that, I believe, represents what our community looked for, what our educators look for. Maybe nobody's dream total, but I think we did a really good job of trying to hit multiple aspects of the student experience, school operations, and of course, our employees. Okay, I'm done. I can go now, right?
Wow. This is, and I know you haven't done it alone. Obviously, you've done it with the input of your peers and the support of your team, but phenomenal work in a very, very short period of time. And I'm thankful that they've given us some extra time to address it. But incredibly impressive that you all were able to pull this together in such detail and really address so many areas of need in our district. So thank you. Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Thank you. I don't know if this is on.
Thank you. Oh, no. It's totally fine. And I have to say, this has really been a BPS effort, right? From the employees who took the time out to share their feedback and either attend or online or whatever. All the cabinet members, every one of them did a significant amount of work, and they would all want to thank their team. Shannon Alvarez is probably one of the MVPs, figuring out all those premium pay things, and the staff that did the work when we couldn't. So secondary learning and learning kept running while I did nothing but. And so it was truly a district-wide effort. And I say our families, our communities, the parents that came out to the meetings, I think you'll see something from everybody throughout the plan. So everybody's serious involvement really made a difference. And I think it's going to be good for kids.
Amazing.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you as well, but you brought this up during your presentation, but I just want to re-highlight the fact that the reason that you guys were able to pull this together was because you were proactive and the whole entire team was proactive and all the cabinet members to be ready for when this money was finally released to us, to be ready to go. And so I appreciate you guys for always being dedicated to the cause and just pushing through with a ridiculous fast turnaround timeline. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm impressed that you only missed one line item in all of
I'm gonna do like 2 days apart, 2 separate tops to bottoms, because I saw things I missed that you might not have caught.
Mr. Susan?
I concur with many of the sentiments that have been said. I had a couple of questions I was just going to run through. So each one of these has, it's very specific, and I appreciate the cross-referencing. It's almost like statutes, the Florida statute, really good. There are some buckets that say like CTE and all those other ones. Do we have like a stronger subset of these? Are like, there's some that talk about giving money to like Title I schools for outdoor stuff and everything else. Is this just kind of a, hey, this is how much we think it's going to cost, we're going to divide it up among, and then we're going to do it that way? Or is there a specific breakdown of where those funds are going to go internally in a plan for it? Like CTE, I think one says like $400,000.
Yeah,
Like where did we get that?
mostly. And so Yeah, it's some, we have really specific.
Sure.
For the purpose of the grant, we need to identify by function and object. So basically by 5,300 is CTE and equipment is 640. So we put money in there. She has a pretty big list and
Okay.
so are my colleagues in all the other areas. But as we're modifying the budget to make it work, then they will revisit it. So for example, CTE or athletics or any of those other areas, teams will get together and figure out the best way to allocate it based on the final approved budget. So for music, Mrs. Orr will work with the music teachers and they will put together a budget. Most of them we've done by school, so we anticipate an allocation per school. So for example, in music, our high schools will get $75,000. So those schools will then identify the FF&E needs within their music programs with their 3 teachers to do it. So as much as possible, we wanted the actual impacted teachers involved. CT is a little different because of equipment. It's going to be on our most failing equipment. But athletics will be the same way. We anticipate an amount per school to then determine the FF&E that they most need, considering, of course, gender equity, equipment needs, and all those kinds of things. So a lot of it will go down to the school level for final determination.
Yeah, and the reason I was asking is there are some schools that are, just like you said, the targeted for the CTE is going to be on the most failing of those programs, right? Like the equipment that we go
Equipment
to purchase
failing,
is going to
yeah,
be talking
right,
about.
right,
Sorry, I had to clarify
Yeah,
that.
no, that's okay.
But I think that's good because when we talk about just, completely dividing it up, it might not be fair.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Those will be really determined by the team on, like, I know there was a list for automotive, like super granular level will be made at that level. Some of them, student supplies, school-based things will be at the school level.
So the other question I was going to have, and this may have already been said, is, okay, we have this $140-something million that we're looking at purchasing and doing. Is there a metric that we have that, first off, are these separate funds, kind of like the sales tax that we have? Is it a separate fund and we're showing those line items? So it's completely separate. We run it in a separate bucket. And then as they're spent, is there a way for us as board members or individuals to take a look and say, okay, these got spent, but these did not? And that's going to lead to the next question, which is, what are we going to do when we don't, you know what I mean, if some of these are not able to be filled? Because,
Yeah, that's a great question. And that, I'm going to use ESSER 2 as an example because we're living that with ESSER 2 right now.
Sure.
So we have the ability to amend. So in ESSER 2, we prioritize 32 parent liaison, which I thought was a brilliant idea. Love the whole thing. We've only filled 8 to 10 of them. So those funds, we will kind of go back and revisit and do an amendment for. So we are constantly monitoring the budgets for each line item, seeing where maybe we went over, maybe we went under. So when you do staff ones, you're doing an average. And so sometimes you guess a little low, a little high, we can amend the grant. Medical insurance. And if you have a bunch of employees that don't take medical insurance, then we're going to amend the grant to rewrite other priorities.
Sure.
So each cabinet member is the lead on the items in their area. So when we got ESSER 2, we sat and met with each cabinet member. We gave them their budget. They track their budget and then submit possible amendments throughout the way. They still have to fit into like the big bucket thing. So we may be able to do more classrooms, right? So, and obviously Dr. Mullins has the final say, but we may find 2, 3, 4, 5 million, which we will, and then we re-amend the budget, we resubmit. So this and this goes to the state, literally every line item, they approve it. If there's not a line item in a budget, we can't spend the money there, which is why this has to be so exhaustively detailed. Then you submit another one that says, take from here, add to there. And so we're right in the middle of doing that with ESSER 2, doing more instructional materials and moving the money around to make sure it is spent as intended. So, yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is that, yes, it is a separate fund. Yes, we will have some fall to the bottom line, and there is a separate set of priorities that we're working on internally that we would then fill those with. Is there any direction from the board on those priorities, or you guys, because there's probably some that are in here that did not make the final cut, right? So there's like a whole nother section 2 of the items, kind of like we do with the capital budget every year and everything else.
For
Is
sure.
is that something that you need board direction on, or is that?
Yeah, I would say, Doctor, as you think of things, which may be like a week from now in the middle of the night, let Dr. Mullins know, because we can cost it out and kind of have it at the ready. So with ESSER 2, we've done that. We've known what the priorities were, and we've had it at the ready. With all of the grants that we've managed, I'm always sort of tuned into board priorities and Dr. Mullins' priorities. Those extras are much more realistically spent on single purchases, as opposed to some of it times with salary. If there's another year, that's helpful. But again, we have to watch maintenance of effort, maintenance of equity. So yeah, we amend all the time. Dr. Mullins will say, hey, can we? And I was like, well, let me work on an amendment. We just are literally, that's what Frank is doing for me right now. We got ESSER 2 lump sum about 4 weeks ago, and we're already working on an amendment. So
That's awesome.
yeah, definitely let Dr. Mullins know, and then he and I meet on the regular.
Sure. And then, so thank you for that. And then, because there are a couple of things that I was looking at that I'll talk about in a second that I was concerned about that we
Sure.
may need some more funds there. But I was really interested in what you were saying as far as metrics on each one of what we are going for. You said that it's a multitude of metrics. You said not only is it student achievement, but it's engagement, it's attendance. That is fascinating, because one of the things we know is that those metrics are what we're looking at when we're trying to go to student achievement and the Thrive by 5 and all those other ones. Is that metrics attached to each one of these that we're doing? And if
Yeah.
so, that is incredible.
There isn't a specific metric for each item. It really depends on the initiative, right?
Okay.
So the state is expecting progress monitoring data. There's a whole separate narrative that I have to finish on. Hopefully everything ultimately improves student achievement, right? So we'll be using progress monitoring data. I'm saying that vaguely because right now our progress monitoring data is iReady, Read 180, and MAP. We infer from the state that it'll be a statewide one next year, and then that will become one of our main metrics, along with other MTSS data, everything from truancy, attendance, discipline, all of those items. So the state's expecting us to measure the overall impact and not necessarily, the 600 different items that are on here. So yeah.
One of the reasons I asked Dr. Sullivan, and again, thank you for this, is because one of the arguments that we make on a regular basis is that if we could utilize more funding, what we could do for our students. And here we have it. And here we're about to start it. And here's the time when we can show the most gains because we just went into the drop. So having those set and ready and having them available to talk to our community about would be incredible. And I know there's nobody better than your team to lead that. So I wanted to say thank you for that. And I was really excited to work in that scope, because I think that what we're going to see is some real good improvement. And then we can make that case as school board members to the state and say, hey, this is where we need help. The other thing
that's good feedback. There's there's going to be a lot of interesting metrics on employees, right? Employee attrition, employee retention. We're putting a lot of money in and a lot of effort in trying to meet the needs of our employees. I know Dr. Thetti's closely monitoring all of that as well. I think we'll have, as we move into school year 24, we'll have a pretty clear handle on what we feel really passionate about continuing after this funding is over. And, having that clear for the state, I think, is really important.
And is there a way, I mean, I could probably do it on here, but I was really happy that we didn't just put 20% towards the learning loss, that we as a district put that number. That is a metric that many other districts are going to be comparing to, because throughout the state, you do have the 2 buckets, right? Because that's what I'm reading. And so us showing that we care more about the learning, then that's incredible. So thank you for doing
Yeah,
that.
and I would argue probably half of the other ones could fall in that same category too. And that was true in ESSER 2 and ESSER 1 as well. We spent far more on academic initiatives. And I think academic initiatives includes social emotional, includes mental health, it includes all of those efforts. So I probably could have put even more in there, but I want to spread it out a little. So.
Great. And then some of the, we have plenty of time to work on individual line items and stuff like that. So I didn't want to do that here. But one of the things that I was looking at is that there's a couple of things inside of here that we're doing that are in like sort of like a pilot phase, right? So like intramural safety and some of the other things that we're doing. The fear that I have is that like the intramurals, I think is something we used to do. It's something that we need to do. I would be fearful of starting projects and then not. Because like the student achievement loss, one thing, that can be a gap fill in that time period. Intramurals is more kind of something that we should push forward.
Yeah, they're ready to go. I mean, all of these are ready to go. So everything in this plan is, cabinet is just waiting for an approved plan.
Yeah.
But they do expire school year 24. And so that's to the point on the board, and Dr. Mullins working on it will have to be tracking. All right, as we're getting to school year 24, these are the things that I want to hopefully continue. They're all ready to go, but they all will expire.
Sure. And then there are some things that I know that we are that we are currently funding now with like reoccurring funds and stuff like that, and then we're adding and enhancing them over here. So I was going to talk in that scope with you also. And then I was looking where I'm going to be focused, just to give you guys a heads up, the athletic. We have a couple of new sports that came online with the FHSA. Had occurrence at weight room in Cocoa where a kid, there was some, there was an equipment failure. So I think that my concern is to make sure that those areas are taken care of, and that's where I'll focus. So we have plenty of time to work on it. I appreciate it. And the other thing I was going to say is that where I think that I'll be looking is at that reserve units where we have 100 extra reserve units. We're at a point right now where we can't even, like we have a bunch of vacancies. So there might be an opportunity that in the event that these are very high level priorities, that we might be able to lower the reserve unit to fund some of those.
I'm actually hoping to lower the reserve units to cut the 4 million I still have to cut. So right now, we've allocated for this school year. The good news is we did the same thing this year with ESSER 2. And I actually just asked Mr. Stockman this morning to give me hard costs and to look at every employee in those line items and actual hard costs to see where I can save some money. So right now it's about 90 allocated, maybe 70 filled. That's why we're double checking. So that's going to be my first stop for the 4 million that I'm over. But you're thinking correctly. So like at the end of this year, at the end of next year, we might find ourselves with an additional 200,000 that could then get added to one of the FF&E projects. FF&E projects are a great place for those underages to go because they can amplify in a system that we already have going. Athletics, I gave them more than they asked, and I would love to have given them more than that. So that's a really easy spot for if 5 people start late, then I've got like another $50,000 that might go to an FF&E project, albeit classroom furniture or athletics or music or activities.
I think one of the issues that we were looking at, and I was looking at the overall budget for it, was that our weight rooms are really in bad shape throughout the county, and that might be an area to go. And the supplement that's inside of there was not at that point. That's all. But we can talk about all these afterwards. We have
Yeah,
plenty of time.
I'm going, for me, that's more a granular decision by the team that oversees that. And whether it's weights or whatever, I would say keep working with Chris Moore and Andrew, and just keep telling Dr. Mullins, and he will tell me regularly hey, do you have whatever? And I'll say, well, let me get an amendment in and see what we can do.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and for the awareness of anybody that might be listening, on our webpage, we have every application and every amendment. So if people are wondering, well, what did you amend from the original? It's all super transparent.
Perfect.
And so right now, this is our 15th grant. Yeah, this is our 15th CARES CRISA ARP grant. And then each one of those have several amendments. All of those are posted on the website. So this will all get posted on the website as soon as I'm past draft mess. And any amendment we request will also be posted on the website. So there'll be no confusion on where any dollar is going.
Before we were canceled for a lot of the revenue that we got from the local funding back in 2005 through 2008, if you remember, there were a lot of mentor teacher supplements and everything else, and they work if they were given the right way. We're about to do that, and I'm extremely excited about it. And that's why I was getting into that. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for
Yeah.
your work, Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Souza.
I feel like you have to come.
No.
I want to let you know we did have weight room, locker room refurbishment in the $280 million version of the plan. So we pulled that off, but we have all the work, and we felt like that was going to be part of some of the work we were going to do at Suhan moving into the future. But we have the information.
I think the other key there is that it's not like it's something that I feel it needs to be addressed immediately. It was able to be addressed through here. It's something that we can talk about offline. But the one other concern that I had is that we have a bunch of FHSAA sports that are coming online, and we don't have facilities for our kids to be able to participate in those. So just talking through those with the athletic directors and stuff like that would be good. But I think that's one of the things. Thank you.
They were one of our groups that we met with, and they gave very specific feedback, and we have it all, so for sure.
So part of, and you have addressed this to some extent, but I just feel like it's important for it to be recorded for eternity, if you will, right? There's been lots of discussion about what happens when we hit the cliff, right? And I feel like our team has done a really good job of addressing that and committing dollars in places where we can have a long-term impact with a one-time spend, where we can, via attrition, absorb a lot of those positions going forward. And so could you just talk briefly about our commitment here in Brevard to not hit that cliff and what we're doing to ensure that we can make decisions, as was referenced about, this is something we may want to pull into Fund 100 after it's all said and done?
Yeah, we've actually been super mindful of that. It keeps me up at night. So the only positions that you will see as funded by ESSER are at a scale and in an area that we absolutely can absorb. So for example, we just did the 8 guidance personnel. That is no question a position we can absorb. Janes are primarily teachers. As you can see, we're not pulling teachers up to the district who when we're in a hiring crisis, right? So you're not seeing positions added up here or positions added in a way that A, are short term, and B, exacerbate our hiring. So one of the things we try to do is look for maybe a different type of employee that isn't already part of our workforce that might find a niche in Brevard public schools for these couple of years to help impact, but not steal from, because a lot of our positions, we're just stealing from each other every day. So like one of us is always mad at each other because we stole someone's employee. So we try to avoid any type of positions like that. And so the plan as it is and what we've done with ESSER 2 and ESSER 1, I don't have concerns about anybody we've onboarded under ESSER. However, there are positions that if we didn't have the whole term list, if we didn't have some of the issues to mitigate the impacts of COVID, we might have had to cut, but we have maintained their employment because of this. Those are the ones that are going to be the tough decisions in 2024, because part of the grant it's part of the big picture financial stability for the country, right? This is just education slice. And so workforce stability was important. They did not want people laid off. Those of us that did ARA together, remember that. And so in a normal situation of evaluating student needs and personnel, we may have laid off some had it not been for COVID. So that decision has been delayed in hopes of recovering enrollment and some of the other economical issues changing over this period. I can tell you, Dr. Mullins talks to me about it every single day. And so really being mindful of that is important, but you won't see a lot of new positions. You'll see a lot of additional compensation for our current, additional incentives for our current, and resources for our current personnel to feel like more valued and supported. So we did not go personnel heavy by design. And in fact, that was a lot of last night's cuts, in fact, just because of the concern. We really want to take care of our workforce.
And that's a great segue to my next question or comment, I guess. And that is, we hear a lot in education that we have all of these dollars that are coming our way. And obviously, we've put together an awesome plan to utilize these dollars effectively. But can you speak just a little bit, just for clarification for our public, if you will, and once again, for, you know, it to be there documented. I feel like one of the struggles is the lack of understanding about the difference between a recurring financial commitment and a non-recurring financial commitment. And so while we do have significant non-recurring dollars currently available, addressing things like long-term pay commitments would put us into recurring that doesn't fit into this plan and would bring us to that cliff, right?
Yep.
So has that also been a priority in looking at how we are allocating these, is making sure that we differentiate there and focus as much on non-recurring commitments as possible?
Yeah, everything's non-recurring that I have. I mean, we didn't build in anything that would be recurring because I tell everybody it has to be expended by September, 2024. There's no gray area. Even some of the instructional materials contracts. So we are paying for 3/5 of the contract because we can only cover it for a year. So some of the expenses will protect Fund 100 as the district recovers from the financial hardship. So it's giving some breathing room, if you will. And some of it, of course, is just super targeted work to eliminate barriers for student success. And so, again, we just kept focusing on the barriers. And the barriers include, all the common things that you can think of, but then again, workforce, right? So having a stable workforce an unstable workforce is a barrier to student success. And so all of those are really targeted, focused efforts, and definitely are not committing the district and anything beyond it. So we've been super careful about every contract, every issue. Even when we looked at potential construction projects, we were realistic about supply chain projects being done, materials, time, and effort, because it has to be fully completed by the time of it over. And we can't encumber something that would obligate the district.
Perfect.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes,
So, okay.
it did. And you actually segued into my next question. I promise I'm almost done. But encumbered is important. As we know, there's been some discussion at the state level about the utilization of ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds. And I addressed, Mr. Susan had asked, will the board be updated on when these dollars are spent and how they're spent? And I'm assuming, I know our finance department and you're on top of it all of the time, but documenting the difference for explanation for the board and anyone else who may be looking at those numbers, I'm assuming that it will be documented what we have committed, what we have encumbered, and what we have actually spent throughout that process.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. We actually get requests on that a lot from the DOE, and it's tricky. And so using personnel as one example, we've just committed to personnel for school year 23 and school year 24, bonuses for school year 23 and 24, like all these things. So that money is going to be looking unutilized through that time period. It's budgeted, it's planned for, there's intentionality around it, but if somebody just wanted to look at a number at the state, they would see that we haven't used it. So I really discourage that line of thinking, but I don't have any power over that line of thinking. And so I'm always happy to show the budget. No, it's budgeted. We've got 24 more months to pay these people. And so it's not going to show as expended because they're not looking at budgeted. And so that's frustrating on our end because we understand that. The other thing happens in large purchases. So I'm going to use our last $2.8 million technology purchase from ESSER 2's technology assistance. We placed the order literally like 3 days after we got the money. It won't show as obligated until we actually get the computers. And we don't anticipate getting them till February-ish, if we're lucky. And so those dollars are going to look like we haven't touched those dollars. Some people may say we don't need that money. We have a budget, we have a plan. It's really clear on where the budget's going. As you guys can see, this many pages detailed every single dollar, but it may not appear that way based on the questions being asked. I can't solve that. So it's a grant that goes through 2024. We've judiciously planned it out to have maximum impact to our students and our staff over and our community over those next 2.5 years. And so I would just hope people ask further questions to understand that. Again, that's also why we put every single thing on the website so that if somebody had a question, they could see every line item planned expenditure, and you'll see notes like school year 23, 24, so that anybody who looks at it can see the intentionality of the plan.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Mr. Susan?
In a subset that says placed order awaiting a supply. You know what I mean? Something in there so that they can see, because you're right, and that's not fair to us.
Right.
Is
Well,
there's-
they don't ask. That's the thing. So typically what will happen, what I've seen in my experience with ESSER 1 or ESSER 2, they're looking at the drawdown from the state. And it's not going to draw down from the state until it's executed. With a question, I could absolutely answer all of that. They're just not always looking to that degree.
Yeah, not so much for them. I mean,
Yeah.
we know the DOE does stuff, but for us too, in our public, so thank you.
Yeah. And we do quarterly updates, and again, 15 of them are sort of live right now. And just for the sake of the group, we mentioned at the board meeting, ESSER 1 is pretty much done. We're sitting on about 150,000. That's all in charters. Charters haven't fully expended theirs yet. So again, the charter expenses are also in our budget. And ESSER 2 is being operationalized as we speak and getting ready for a big amendment.
Thank you, Dr. Dr. Mullins?
Yeah, if I could just add just additional comments. I appreciate the interest and concern, Ms. Belford, about the reality that these are limited funds. They are finite funds. Ms. Lisinski and her team are working very closely to monitor and manage those items, not only that have provided workforce stability for us, because the board is very aware, we have used some fund balance to offset our loss of revenue and not have to do workforce layoff. That was our priority. We know we're hopefully in the swing of enrollment recovery. So we're monitoring that, but also those items like middle school intramural. I mean, once we've implemented those, it's hard to not want to continue and perpetuate them. So beginning now to know what that priority list is going to be come to fiscal year 2025. So we will have that waiting for the final plan to be approved. We will be managing and monitoring that regularly in our regular updates to the board throughout this next 2 years, 2.5 years. We'll provide a look at that as well for the board, because there are positions in here that are currently offsetting Fund 100 expenses that, but for the grant, we wouldn't continue to carry because we're already, the board knows the $14.9 million revenue decline from last fiscal year to this fiscal year. So fortunately, the grant has allowed us to provide that workforce stability, which is allowable moving forward. I want to highlight just how much thought and intention went into this whole process. One-to-one technology. Mr. Cheatham and his team have had a one-to-one technology priority moving out the next several years. What this allows us to do is accelerate that, and now he is able to use those out years to build the sustainability. And that's what's so exciting about investing this one time in technology, getting us to the standard, but he's now working to take the funds we know we'll have in a recurring sense through capital, LCI, and now let's have a sustainability plan so that we don't have 5 years, 7 years from now, not only the financial cliff when the money is gone, but then the technology failure cliff. So I wanted to reassure the board that a lot of thought and consideration has gone into sustaining that. But I appreciate the opportunity. Just kudos to the entire grants team of a few, as well as just tremendous yeoman's work on behalf of Cabinet in literally 2 weeks to present such a thoughtful, intentional, integrated proposal impacting across our entire district, all facets and stakeholders. It's just been a real impressive demonstration of the commitment of the people behind this organization.
Dr. Mullins, for the sake of, there are people here, huh? For the sake of anybody listening, we will post the application as soon as it's ready, and then note that it's not yet board approved for anybody that wants to view the application. And then, of course, we'll note when it's board approved. Just still a week or two with crossing the T's, dotting the I's, finding mistakes, but it should be relatively soon.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan.
Anyone else have anything? I'll just tell you, Dr. Sullivan, when I got the call from Dr. Mullins telling me that we had gotten word that we had 2 weeks to get this submitted to the state, the first thing I said to him was, thank goodness our team was already ahead of the ball. I can't imagine where other districts may be at this point in time being asked to do this amount of work in truly 2 weeks when you guys were just so far ahead of it. So
I think they were quite vocal, which is why there's now an extension. We grimaced, but we were okay because we knew we had already done so much community feedback. But yes, I think those other districts spoke loudly and got a delay. And I'm thankful to try to catch errors and fine tune. And I literally hand input almost every number on that sheet. And there could be $1 million off somewhere. I don't think so because I double checked that this morning. But I am thankful for the opportunity to do much more detailed work.
I'm sure, and hopefully get some rest in between as well. Somewhere.
That's the plan.
A little. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Hearing no further business, this workshop is adjourned.